There's going to be more Nissa decks, though, and we're going to see that develop as well. And I think some of the decks that already exist might start to pick up Nissa as their B plan. I'm thinking things like Teamer Elementals, which is used like Terror of the Peaks. Maybe it's just supposed to be a Nissa deck.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's a possibility. We're starting to see more and more copies of Nissa start to show up in Teamer Adventures, even though that's starting to kind of drop in popularity from the first couple weeks of this standard. But
well, meanwhile, we have our match, and it is a banger for you. It is Marcio Carvalho taking on Lamiro Harris. Rakdos Sacrifice versus Sultai Ramp. Rakdos Sacrifice, a holdover from the pre-ban format. Obviously lost a big part of the strategy in Cauldron Familiar, but still putting up some results early on.
Right. We've seen deck lists that are playing Loris, obviously don't have permanents that cost more than 2 mana in their deck, and are getting rid of Mayhem Devil after the ban of Cauldron Familiars, turning off the Witch's Oven combination. But Marcio is actually playing for Mayhem Devil and kind of going up the curve like a traditional sacrifice deck.
Yeah, he's got Rankle all the way up to 4. There's even a Bolus' Citadel here. And look at the start from Marcio, really on the battlefield quickly. Whisper Squad into Priest of Forgotten Gods into Woe Strider. This is a lot for Lamario to come back from very early on.
Yeah, from the Sultai side, not many ways to develop their battlefield early with the removal of Growth Spiral from the format. So Neuro's going to come down and accelerate their mana, but Marcio's already got a foothold in this game.
Yeah, we talked about the key of pressuring these Sultai decks early. Marcio has found a fine way to do that. Also, though, has some resiliency built in. There's Village Rites to draw some cards. Priest of Forgotten God's going to be able to answer any blockers that might come down. So I really like the setup from Marcio.
Yeah, I want to highlight Whisper Squad in particular. I think that's a card that didn't really get its fair shake. Kind of overshadowed with Cauldron Familiar, and you wanted to play cards like Serrated Scorpion and Gutter Bones with it. But this is a really powerful 1-drop in combination with Priest of Forgotten Gods. It basically makes it so you can never run out of food.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I very early on in the format was playing Whisper Squad, and it did eventually get outmoded, but the card had moments where it really impressed me. I'm thinking particularly of like the mono black aggro deck that was built around Banner, and Whisper Squad was very impressive in that spot.
Right. And I mean, this is a spot where Marcio doesn't have to commit anything more to the battlefield. He can just activate this Whisper Squad twice. And this Teferi is just not going to get a foothold in this game.
Now, it feels like you needed more than a Teferi here. Teferi just card neutral, no real impact on the battlefield. Do see Hydroid Krasis, plural, rolled up for Lamario. So if he gets a little bit more time, can start going down that route. But Whisper Squad's going to do its thing now. Bring a couple friends to the battlefield. And the pressure continues to mount.
Yep, and Lamario's just on a 2-turn clock already. It's going to be interesting to see whether Marcio wants to ignore the Teferi, which isn't really that big of a deal right now, and just go for face, but I could see it either way.
Yeah, I'm inclined to lean towards pressure here, but I trust Marcio.
Yeah, well, I mean, whatever decision Marcio decides is very likely the optimal one, but, tons of pressure on the battlefield. Priest of Forgotten Gods, even if Lamario is able to stabilize, kind of represents some burn, essentially, especially with those Whisper Squad. But yeah, it looks like...
Look at this attack. Interesting. So a bit of a split attack here, trying to just maybe take off the ability for Teferi to do any kind of phasing tricks.
Yeah, mitigating the phasing by attacking the Teferi ever so slightly, but still pressuring from Marcio. And we're probably just going to see... Let's see how many Extinction Events Harris is playing. 2 copies of Extinction Event in Harris's deck. And Marcio knows this is an open decklist tournament, so I think it's likely that he's willing to commit more to the board here.
Yeah, especially if he can, a little bit here.
And he can diversify his CMCs to play around it a little bit. Oh, Bastion Remembrance.
Wow, that's an interesting draw. Not a card we've seen a lot of in Standard thus far, but this is a nice little bit of protection against something like Extinction Event, still getting value. Obviously, you need the Woe Strider to make that work. Extinction Event does exile, but Marcio has it.
Right, only 1 copy of Bastion Remembrance in Marcio's deck, but I mean, it's basically just acting like a 5th Mayhem Devil, so I think this is a cool little addition to these decks. And like you said, does this... I guess this isn't exactly... Oh, with Village Rites, this is actually lethal, yes.
Yeah, you use that to sacrifice the last Wolf Strider, and that will get the job done.
Yep, normally Wolf Strider can't sacrifice itself, but with Village Rites, Marcio has the option to sacrifice every single creature on the battlefield, unless I'm missing something, which is entirely possible.
It is possible. I saw it as lethal as well. Let's see. It looks like Marcio is going to start sacrificing now.
Okay, was waiting on the Teferi activation. I'm not sure if Phazon can actually bust that up, but you're just being a little cautious.
Yeah, and now we're going to do a little bit of sacrificing, and the writing is on the wall. Marcio looks poised to take game one. Did so beautifully. Nice job building up pressure. Committed exactly the right amount to the battlefield, as you would expect Marcio to do. Obviously, Marcio has established himself as one of, if not the best player in the world over the last few years.
I mean, and this really highlights what you briefly alluded to. I mean, unfortunately, we are in a pandemic, and I don't want to downplay the effect of that, but getting international players to play in SCG Tour events is pretty awesome.
Yeah, completely agree with you. And there you see Marcio ready to fire off that Village Rites, sacrifice the last Woe Strider, and that is lethal damage. Marcio Carvalho up a game against Lamario Harris. We're going to go to sideboarding now, but of course, I got to tell you about our friends over at Versus Live. Corey and Ross both participating in this tournament, both doing quite well thus far. Y'all know they get together every Tuesday and Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern. Play games of Magic, every format, everything you can think of. I always check in religiously at the start of all new formats, any post-ban formats. I go watch what the Versus Live guys are doing. They're always on the very tip of the metagame.
Yeah, those are my very favorite shows to do when I was on Versus Live. Was always, preview season and right after a new set had come out. Super fun to do some brewing.
Yeah. Well, we're going to sideboard now. What do you see from both players here? Any significant shifts, or are we just shoring up removal a little bit on the Sultai side, a little bit more sticking power on the Rakdos Sacrifice side? What are the goals here?
Certainly the most impactful card from both players as far as sideboarding is Cry the Carnarium from Harris. So not only is that a cheap sweeper that can kill Marcio's creatures, but the Exile Clause, gets around Woe Strider, anything along those lines, removes any dice triggers from the equation like Bastion of Remembrance. So that's probably the most important card in the matchup after sideboard. Marcio, on the other hand, nothing too special stands out. A couple copies of Duress, maybe a Soul Guide Lantern if he wants to be able to disrupt Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. We could see a scenario where in matchups like this, he's actually going bigger with a second copy of Bolas Citadel. But I don't have a ton of experience with this matchup, so I'm not sure if you just want to kind of stay low to the ground like we saw in game one, or if you're actually trying to play a deeper game with these discard spells and haymakers.
Well, it looks like Marcio does like second Citadel, brought that in. Also got a couple of Noxious Grasp as well. Pick off those Nisses we talked about as being so important for Lamario's side. Going to be on the play this time is Lamario. That certainly helps blunt that aggression. Love the Soul Ring sleeves from Lamario. That's my default sleeve, actually.
So Lamario has the best card in the matchup, Cry the Carnarium, and the mana to cast it, but the problem is the rest of their hand kind of stinks.
Yeah, Enter the God Eternal, certainly large impact, but takes some time to get there.
Where Marcio, on the other hand, has a pretty nice curve. Turn 1 Whisper Squad, turn 2 Agonizing Remorse, turn 3 Woe Strider, put some pressure, disrupted his opponent. The second copy of Whisper Squad's never ideal, but this is still a nice opening hand.
Yeah, that Agonizing Remorse also, I believe, a one-of from the sideboard and one in the main deck. That explains that second one. I was confused when I saw that second copy show up. One of in both the sideboard and the main deck, but a good draw here. Going to be able to take some control over how Lamario is going to be interacting. And like you said, Cry the Carnarium, best card in the matchup. It's going to be exiled.
And now
Lamario's going to need a new plan.
Lamario's hand just doesn't do anything now. Doesn't have double blue for Narset or Teferi.
Kind of a bunch of blanks.
Basically in the awkward scenario of drawing lands is bad, but you need your second blue source to actually cast your spells.
Never a good spot to be in. And Marcio knows the vast majority of Lamario's hand, knows he can put the pressure on. But here's a big draw. from Lemario. Finds that second blue source. Now we have some options. Teferi, Master of Time.
Watery Grave, step 1. Fortunately for Lemario, Marcio doesn't have enough pressure to actually kill Teferi this turn. Teferi will take up to 5 on Marcio's turn, but still, that said, Lemario needs a lot of help to fix their hand.
Yeah, and you see that Bastion of Remembrance in hand for Marcio again, extending the clock quite a bit. Will eventually be a factor. It does look like full pressure towards Teferi this time. Like you mentioned, going to survive with the +1.
I like this. You know that you don't have enough pressure to close the game out quickly. You know that Lemario's hand is pretty weak, so you just want to constrict the number of turns that Teferi's there to improve their hand.
Yeah, it also forces the Teferi activation earlier in the turn, so you can Agonize Remorse with full information, full access to all the cards that Lemario will have on this turn.
That's a great point.
Takes the Enter the God Eternals. Makes sense. Gotten rid of the 2 best cards against his deck thus far with those 2 key Agonizing Remorses, the only 2 in the deck.
And this might just be another situation where Marcio can just say go and leave up the Whisper Squad and get
a
little bit more value.
Teferi is doing its best to improve the quality of Lemario's hand, but no real hits thus far.
Right. Lemario is really looking for an Uro or even a Nissa. Nissa's not at its best right now, but just continuing to generate some 3/3s to get in the way of Marcio's creatures would be a big pickup here.
Agreed. Not forthcoming yet. Is going to go ahead and deploy Narset. A little surprised to see that sticking post board.
I was actually asked, are you surprised to see Thought Erasure post board?
Yeah, that's another one I'm inclined to get away from. Could be there's just not enough options in the sideboard for Lemario.
Right. Being on the play, it's a little bit stronger, but if this goes to a game 3, I think it's possible we see removal of Thought Erasure from the deck.
Yeah, I'm looking through a real quick glance. There's 6 slam dunks in the Mario sideboard that definitely were coming in. Extinction Event, Cry the Cardarium, 2 Enter the God Eternals. So 6 potential cuts. I don't know if that gets you through all the cards that you're not super thrilled about here.
Right.
Marcio continuing to pressure those Planeswalkers. Feels comfortable playing a little bit longer game. You could see why. Nice setup here. Midnight Ranger alongside Bastion of Remembrance. Thinks he can grind.
Yeah, it makes sense. Teferi's going to go down in combat here. Narset will go down to 1 loyalty. So to some extent, Narset will still be turning off Midnight Reaper on this turn. But after that, Marcio's pretty well set up from a sweeper, even Extinction Event or Cry the Canarium. The presence of that Woe Strider means that Midnight Reaper will still be able to draw cards.
Yeah, and I wouldn't understate the value of Marcio having so much knowledge regarding the contents of Lemario's hand throughout this entire game. It's just allowed him to really shape his strategy very well.
Debating between playing the Bastion or the Midnight Reaper this turn.
What do you like?
My inclination is just to play the Midnight Reaper.
Me too.
Even if Harris has a sweeper, sure, you don't get to draw a bunch of cards, but you still get to draw 1. And Midnight Reaper is just so much more pressure on the battlefield. And he already knows the contents of his hand, so you know that he has to find the Extinction Event. Yeah,
it looks like Marcio agrees. And now 2 Thought Erasures in hand for Lemario. Not paying a lot of dividends here.
Right. And the presence of Thought Erasure is probably the tiebreaker. So Marcio knows that there's a Thought Erasure, and Lemario doesn't have much to do, so they might be inclined just to cast the Thought Erasure.
Yeah, there is a draw step there that yields the combination of Thought Erasure plus Extinction Event. So if you play Bastion of Remembrance on that turn as opposed to Midnight Reaper, I think you're actually in a really bad spot if that draw happens.
Right.
Not the case, though. We're just going to see Cultivate from Lemario. Follow up Thought Erasure. We'll take a Bastion here, I'm assuming.
We are starting to reach the point. I'm not exactly sure if Lemario boarded out both their copies of Ugin the Spirit Dragon, but we're getting to the point where that actually could come into play.
Yeah, great point. That seems like the way back into this game, if there is one for Lemario.
So I think we're just going to see Marcio clean up this Narset and just try to apply as much pressure as possible.
I continue to just kind of search through Lamario's deck and try and think about how we're setting up in these post-board games. You have some Ether Gust you have to get out of your deck. And then I would assume it's probably the top end that goes after that if the Thought Erasures are staying in. So I don't know if Ugin is present or not.
Yeah, it's hard. Oh, okay. That's an interesting draw.
Yeah, Bolas' Citadel kept on top for Marcio. I guess that's like an insurance policy, right? If something does go really wrong, this is how I'm going to rebuild.
Right, yeah. It's like, I'm way ahead on the battlefield. I might as well just have, like you said, some kind of insurance policy so I can play a deep game in case it comes to that.
Kind of already has the insurance policy in the form of this Midnight Reaper plus Woe Strider, though. This is going to be a tough one for Lamario.
Yeah, we're seeing a cute little trick here. Just essentially turning Gutterbones plus Woe Strider into a draw spell. Marcio didn't have anything better to do with his mana, so might as well just generate a card.
Marcio says, sweet, free Gutterbones. Love the Gutterbones value.
And next turn, 6 mana and access to Bolas' Citadel.
Yep. And I think that is enough for me to call this one. I do not see any way out for Lamario here.
Yep, even if Lamario draws Ugin the Spirit Dragon, plays it, Marcio's just going to draw so many cards and have access to Bolas' Citadel on the following turn.
Right. Is going to be able to fire off a large Hydroid Krasis here. Maybe in combination with Thought Erasure if he determines he can survive in that scenario. See if Lamario fears the contents.
So Krasis for 4 would bring Lamario up to 9 and be able to cover one of the 3/2s in combat. So
fall to 1.
Theoretically be alive.
Yeah, that's an interesting decision.
You might just be, that Marcio has a Whisper Squad and then an unknown card that was topped.
Right.
So it's fair to say.
So you assume it's of quality.
Right. It's of quality, but things might be so bad that you just have to get full value off the Hydro Krasis.
I could see that.
You're not beating something like Claim to Fame anyways, or excuse me, Claim the Firstborn. I got Amonkhet Remastered on the mind.
We all have Amonkhet on the mind one more time. Well, look at this. This is odd. We kept in the Ether Gust. I don't know if I would have gone that route either.
Yeah, I mean, Mayhem Devil is a powerful card and one of the better setups for Marcio, but I agree with you.
And Marcio just has it all now. Bolas' Citadel into Noxious Grasp, and that means Marcio Carvalho takes down the Mario Harris 2-0. Marcio made it look pretty easy there, quite frankly.
Right. Just showing off how effective sometimes just curving out can be. These and specifically Lamario's deck is, I don't want to, it's a little bit more tuned for the mirror. It's going bigger. It has Teferi Master of Time, 3 copies of Casualty of War, 2 Ugin the Spirit Dragon, some copies of Cultivate. Just, clearly trying to play some deep games, and you can just get under a strategy like that.
Absolutely. I'm assuming you're familiar with the saying, you don't know what you've got until it's gone. And I've felt that way recently about Rakdos Sacrifice. Now, obviously, Rakdos Sacrifice in Standard had a lot to overcome. There's been incredibly powerful Standard decks throughout its time here. But I've been playing Rakdos Sacrifice in Historic, actually. It's basically the same deck, and it's so powerful, so consistent, and lines up really well against the Historic format. It just shows what this deck has been capable of while it's been here in Standard as well.
For sure. I do want to nitpick a little bit. The addition of Stitcher Supplier and Phyrexian Tower
Phyrexian Tower is the one I will
upgrades.
concede. Yeah, Phyrexian Tower is an insane magic card, and you get way more consistent Bolas' Citadels. Absolutely, I'll concede that point. But still, I mean, there's no questioning the power of just this raw engine. And Priest of Forgotten Gods, that's a card that, when the set was spoiled, it was very, very high on my list. It seemed like it had all the potential in the world, and it kind of faded to the background for a while. But you knew once it got the pieces surrounding it, it was just going to be the engine for so many successful archetypes.
Yep.
Well, it sounds like we are just about ready for our time shifted match. Why don't we head on down